proper to prematurely try and curtail certain things. I believe
It
that
is absolutely proper to try to make an evidentiary determination beforehand on things that would be objectionable.
I don't disagree with what the court is saying. I'm saying that if we seek to, or we establish a foundation for his knowledge of certain things that the defense does not believe he has knowledge of, I believe that curtailing our ability to make that foundation would not.
I don't think that's what he's asking.
Well, that's not what he's asking.
So those folders, they were in like buckets of 30. Which one am I supposed to be looking at? I thought we had litigated everything there was to litigate about. Someone.
Wait, we keep going.
All right. I mean, he can go to bed early.
I don't know.
I'm not saying I want him to keep having to be woken up at 5, but I would suggest that maybe he try to get his sleep in as soon as he gets back after he has his evening meal.
I understand, but for some reason, since the pleading out of the other defendants, there's been some kind of shift. And if that shift isn't wholly necessary, it would be good if he could get the same amount of rest he was getting prior to that.
Okay, so who would be in charge of what time they are awakened in the mornings?
Bill was saying, yes, I was transferred. I speak with him again. I spoke with him on yesterday, but I speak with him again.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sure. Can I ask the state a question? Is when we get around to the jury charges, I know, I don't know, but I think that early on in this case, John Floyd was involved. Is he still going to be available? Because certainly he's got some knowledge of RICO that might be helpful to the court in crafting the charges. Okay.
And Judge, we've actually been working with him.
Okay.
So
Great.
We'll make him available.
Thank you. So Ms. Persfield was just looking at wherever someone's evidence is and does not, oh, no. I didn't.
You don't see it.
That would be. Is the statement a video? Maybe that's what it is. Okay. So I think we were looking for a transcript. Is there a transcript available?
We can make one really quickly. We'll have to give it to the court this afternoon.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
I believe there is a transcript.
Okay. Well, if we have one or can create one quickly, that might be helpful. All right, so since we're waiting on the jury anyway, what else did we need to be covering on Friday? Everybody here? All right, well, they'll get back to me sometime before Friday morning on that question. All right, you'll have your witness ready, whomever your first witness is going to be. We can go ahead and get them out. Hmm? Okay. Who's your first witness going to be?
Sarah Van Hall.
Okay. Yeah, you can come on in up to the stand. The jury's on their way out.
Testing.
All right, for the jury. Call jury for the jury.
Thank you. If you'll swear our witness, please.
You raise your right hand. You swear firm testimony you give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
State and spell your first and last name to the mic, please.
My first name is Sarah, Sarah. My last name is Van Holm. That's 2 words. VanHolm.
And where are you employed?
I am currently employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in the Division of Forensic Science.
And if you can tell the jury, what are your current job duties and responsibilities?
So I am a firearms examiner. We primarily determine if a bullet or a cartridge case was fired from a particular firearm. We also perform services in serial number restoration and muzzle to target distance determinations.
And if you could tell the jury about your education and training in ballistics and firearm analysis.
So I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of North Georgia. Prior to being employed with the GBI, I was an operations manager for a small firearms manufacturing company. I was a certified firearms instructor, and I was also a professional competitive shooter. Upon being employed with the GBI, I completed a 14-month training program to become a firearms examiner, and that was followed by 7 months of supervised casework. I have been certified as an armorer for multiple firearms manufacturers, including Glock. I have attended multiple conventions and conferences that are firearms related, and I am also a member of the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners.
And over the course of your time, well, and I don't think I asked, how long have you been with the GBI?
How long? Since July of 2017.
How many cases have you analyzed while you've been at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
Almost 400 cases.
And how many cases have you worked where you had to compare both projectiles and handguns?
The majority of those cases dealt with comparisons.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender Ms. Sarah Van Holm as an expert in ballistics and firearms analysis.
All right, she is so qualified and may testify as an expert in those fields.
If you can tell the jury, what is the difference between a semi-automatic handgun and an automatic weapon?
Yes, so a semi-automatic handgun is a handgun that fires one cartridge per single pull of the trigger. An automatic handgun is a type of handgun that fires multiple cartridges per single pull of the trigger.
And are there mechanisms that can be used to change a semi-automatic handgun to an automatic handgun?
Yes, there are.
And what are those mechanisms?
So there are different ways to turn a semi-automatic handgun into a fully automatic handgun. The most common one that we see in casework is going to be something called a Glock switch. It is usually a slide back plate aftermarket part that replaces that back slide plate, and it renders a Glock firearm fully automatic.
Okay. And I want to draw your attention to DOFS case number 2022-101-9842, where you requested to do any testing on a Glock 9mm pistol.
Yes, I was.
And what agency submitted the evidence to the GBI?
It was Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
And what were you requested to do?
I was requested to perform what we call a check function on the firearm and determine if it can fire fully automatic.
And how would you do a check function test on a semi-automatic?
So semi-automatic, when we perform a check function, we are going to test fire that firearm. We're going to look at that firearm to determine if the safeties are operational and functional. We're going to determine if there's any alterations done to the firearm, if there's any damage to the firearm, and if that firearm is operating as it should.
Okay. And is that the same process you would go through to determine if it's an automatic weapon?
Yes, so if it's an automatic weapon, we perform a few extra test fires to determine that it will fire a certain amount of cartridges to render it full auto.
And how many cartridges are you looking for to determine if it's full auto?
6 or more.
And why are you determining if it's 6 or more?
So that's according to the Code of Georgia standards for what is defined as a fully automatic weapon.
And what was the serial number of the weapon that you were asked to test?
So if I may refer to my notes. So the serial number on the slide and frame was BPHW105, and the serial number on the barrel, which was different, was KUT516.
And what was the type of firearm?
The type of firearm, according to the frame, was a Model 45 Glock 9mm pistol.
And were you able to test to determine if that Glock 9mm pistol was operating as an automatic weapon?
Yes, the plate on the back, the full auto sear on the back did render the firearm full auto.
And you said the sear on the back?
Yes, so that would be the aftermarket slide plate auto sear, or the Glock switch as it's commonly called.
And after conducting this test, did you write a report?
Yes, I did.
And are your findings contained in that report?
Yes, they are.
And after your report was published, did that conclude your involvement in that DOFS case number?
Yes, it did.
You talked about the fact that there was a different serial number, BPHW105, on the barrel of the gun, and then KUT516 on a different portion of the gun. Is that unusual?
Yes, generally that means that the barrel was replaced from the original barrel.
Court's indulgence for a moment. Is that significant for you as a firearms examiner?
It can be, because during comparisons, we look at the markings that the barrels impart on the projectiles. So that is something that we would look at if we were doing comparisons.
All right. Court's indulgence for a moment. If there is a difference of the serial numbers, does that have any impact on being able to trace that firearm?
So typically the firearm is traced using the serial number on the frame, because that's technically what the firearm is, that is the frame of the firearm. So that is how you typically would trace a firearm.
Commercial approach. I'm going to show you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 51XXA. Tell me if you recognize State's Exhibit 51XXA.
For the court, this firearm is cleared. There is a lock through the chamber. Yes, I do recognize it.
And how do you recognize 51XXA?
I recognize it by the serial number and my initials on the trigger guard.
And is that the same weapon that we have just been discussing a few moments ago?
Yes, it is.
All right. And you talked about the Glock switch. If you can pull the weapon out again for us, if you can just kind of show the jury, point to where is the converter or the switch on the weapon.
Yes, so typically Glocks will have a back slide plate that is flush to the slide on the back. So that was removed, and this Glock switch was then replaced and put on the firearm.
And we talked about the two different serial numbers. If you can just point or show the jurors where the two different serial numbers are.
Yes, so there's a serial number here on the frame. There's a serial number on the slide. And so that's the slide and frame serial numbers, which is going to be BPHW105. And then the serial number on the barrel is actually going to be right here on the chamber of the barrel. And that is KUT516.
Are you familiar with the Nibin system?
Yes, I am.
When there are two different serial numbers on the Nibin system, numbers on the weapon, do the fact that does the different serial numbers on the barrel and the other parts have any impact on the ability to get proper knifing results or ballistic comparisons?
Okay, so for comparisons, it may impact it because if a barrel is switched out, obviously we're looking at the markings on the actual projectiles themselves. For NIVEN, Integrated Ballistics Information Network, that has to do with cartridge cases only. So we're not looking at projectiles for that. So switching out a barrel isn't as pertinent as it would be maybe a slide.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Max Shard. I represent Shannon Stillwell. I just have a couple questions. It seems that you're telling us that there's components from 2 different firearms on this gun.
Yes.
Okay. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what caliber bullets or projectiles does this gun, as is, fire?
9mm.
Okay, fires 9mm. All right. Do you have any evidence that this gun has been used in any crimes on record?
I do not.
Okay. Do you have any evidence that this firearm has ever been fired by Shannon Stillwell?
I do not.
Do you have any evidence at all that Shannon Stillwell has ever been in possession of this firearm that you tested?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Doug Weinstein. I represent Diamante Kendrick.
Good morning.
I have some similar questions to Mr. Sharp. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Kendrick ever fired this firearm?
I do not.
Do you have any evidence that Mr. Kendrick was ever in possession of this firearm?
I do not.
Do you know who modified this firearm to put the switch on the firearm?
I do not.
And do you know who may have modified the firearm so that it has a barrel that is inconsistent with the frame?
I do not know.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Redirect.
The questions that were just asked of you, would you have any way to know any of those answers, given your work at the GBI?
I would not.
No further questions.
Who can give us those answers?
I do not know.
I look forward to hearing from them.
All right, you are excused. State, call your next witness.
All right, the state calls Brian Shea to the stand. We're gonna need that.
You ready for that one time? Swear to affirm testimony about this court, true culture, never what you say.
I do.
You have to see, you state your first and last name, spell them both, please.
First name Brian, last name Shea. It's BRYANSHEA.
And where are you currently employed?
I am currently employed with the Gwinnett County School Police
And how long have you been with the Gwinnett County School Police?
since August 19th of this year.
And prior to working at the Gwinnett County, for the Gwinnett County School Police, where did you work?
I was a senior investigator for Fulton County District Attorney's Office, but I was task forced out to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
How long did you work at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office?
I started in August of 2021.
Now, you said you also served as a task force officer with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. What did you do as a task force officer?
I was attached to an enforcement group. Our main function was illegal firearms, narcotics, and gang issues.
And while you were a task force officer, did you have the occasion to handle cases involving machine gun conversion devices?
I did.
And is that commonly called a switch?
It is.
What type of cases did you handle regarding machine gun conversion devices?
Um, One specifically is I test fired a piece of evidence involved in the YSL case, the RICO trial. It was a Glock model 45 9mm that had a MCD, a machine gun conversion device affixed to the back of it.
And if you can briefly tell the jury, what was your education, background, and training experience to qualify you to serve as a task force officer?
I started law enforcement in 2003 with the Atlanta Police Department. I served there for almost 10 years. Left in 2010, went to the City of Johns Creek Police Department, where I started as uniform patrol, worked my way to detective, then made my way to narcotics detective, worked undercover narcotics for a task force. Left there in 2021, came here, was immediately assigned to the ATF, where I studied under numerous special agents there in weapons, firearm recognition, and how firearms work, specifically illegal ones.
So I want to take you to May 25th, 2023, where you asked to test a Glock Model 45 pistol.
I was.
And were you familiar with that type of firearm?
I was. It was actually the duty issued weapon that I was given by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
And there is an exhibit in front of you, 51XXA. Please look and tell me if you recognize State's Exhibit 51XXA.
Yes, ma'am. I'm familiar. I recognize this weapon.
How do you recognize it?
This was the weapon that I test fired that day.
And we say that day, talking about May 25th, 2023?
Correct.
All right. And how many, in your time either as a task force officer or as in your other roles, how many guns with switches have you handled during the course of your law enforcement career?
Oh, numerous.
And what were you asked to do regarding that weapon?
I was asked to just do a demo video to show its functionality, that it does in fact fire as a fully automatic machine gun.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as 51XXC. Tell me if you recognize State's Exhibit 51XXC.
I do.
How do you recognize 51XXC?
By the case number and my initials and the date and time on it.
Okay. And what is contained on 51XXC?
It is the video of myself at the Fulton County Training Center range, test firing a normal function semi-automatic Glock 45 9mm, and then test firing the State's Exhibit.
Okay. And did that video fairly accurately depict your test firing of both those two weapons?
It does.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender and admit 51XXC.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Now you said before you tested it, a normal functioning handgun and then I guess a not normal. What's the distinction between the normal way that it should operate and the abnormal way?
So the normal way, a semi-automatic pistol is one trigger pull, expels one round from the magazine out of the barrel of the firearm. And when I test fired the state's exhibit, it was one trigger pull and it expelled 6 rounds out of the magazine, out of the weapon.
Sure. And before we play it, just where are you when you do the test fire?
The Fulton County Training Center on their range.
And which gun do you test fire first?
So it starts off with my actual duty weapon. That is the same make and model as the state's exhibit. And mine is a semi-automatic pistol, functioning as a semi-automatic pistol.
Glock model 45. This is my duty issued weapon. Serial number is Bravo Tom Uncle George 256. Empty chamber. Four. 6. 6-round magazine loaded into duty weapon. Range is hot. Empty magazine.
What did you say there?
I said empty magazine, and I showed an empty chamber, that there are no more rounds inside the pistol.
6 rounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Glock model number 45, serial number Baker Paul Henry, Whiskey 105. 6-round magazine.
And what do you say there?
I said empty magazine, empty chamber again.
And did that conclude your demonstration video?
It did.
Court's indulgence for a moment. When you shot the automatic weapon, did it fire 6 rounds with one trigger pull?
It did.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Any cross of this witness?
No, Your Honor. No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for your time. You are excused. Call your next witness.
Raven Williams.
Swear firm testimony you give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. State your first and last name, and spell your first and last name out to the mic for the court today.
Raven Williams, RavenWilliams.
And good morning, Ms. Williams. How are you?
Good morning, I'm fine.
How old are you?
36,
And do you work?
yeah,
What type of work do you do?
home health care,
Okay. And are you from Atlanta?
basically, yeah.
When you say basic, what do you mean?
I was raised in Augusta,
And how long have you been in the Atlanta area?
about 16 years.
And do you know someone by the name of Shamel Drinks?
Yes.
And how do you know Shamel?
I've been knowing him since Augusta.
Were you both raised together in Augusta?
We wasn't raised together, but we were around each other a lot.
And are you familiar with his family?
Yes,
Do you know his mother?
yes.
And what's her name?
Sandra,
And does he have siblings?
yes.
How many?
Mm, 4,
And did he have children?
no,
Did Shamel have a nickname?
yes.
What was his nickname?
Peanut,
And is that a nickname you called him when y'all were back in Augusta?
yes.
Now, I know you said that you all grew up together or were around each other in Augusta. Do you know if he was born in Augusta?
Yes. No, I think he was born in Atlanta, I think.
Or was he raised in Augusta?
Some partially. That was back and forth.
When they were back and forth, is that between Augusta and Atlanta?
Yes.
Do you know where in Atlanta he would stay when they were in Atlanta?
I'm not sure when he was staying with his mom, but at the time of death, he was living with me.
Back in 2022, did you ever know him to hang out in the Summer Hill neighborhood?
Yeah, I think so.
What about in Mechanicsville?
I guess that's what you call it. I'm assuming.
I want to direct your attention to March 14th, 2022. Did you have the occasion to see Shamel Drinks on that day?
Yes.
Where were you when you saw him?
Home
At the time, where were you living?
in Douglasville.
If you were coming from downtown, how would you get to your home?
20 West.
Sitting here today, do you remember what time he came to your house, or was he at your house all day?
I don't remember the time verbatim. I just know when I got there, it's like it was almost time to get my daughter from gymnastics, and that's normally like I want to say like 6 something, but I just can't remember verbatim. But like around that time frame, I believe.
And we say 6 something, that's 6 something PM?
Yeah.
All right. Was he already at your home when you were getting ready to maybe get your daughter from gymnastics?
Yes.
Was he at your home with anyone?
Yes.
Do you know who?
A boy named Barter.
Had you ever met that individual, Barter, before?
No.
Do you know if Barter was a nickname or his given name?
I'm not sure.
When you were home, let me ask, did you get home and he was already there with Barter, or did he come to your house and you let him in and he came with Barter?
I kind of think that it was kind of like at the same time or like a few minutes off. I think he had pulled up and then they were in the car. And then when I pulled up, he started coming into the house.
Did both he and Barter come inside of the house?
He was coming in first with me, telling me who it was. And then the guy was coming up.
Now, I think I may have asked you this, but I'll ask you again. Had you ever seen Barter before?
No,
Had you ever heard Shamel talk about Barter?
no.
Did you all have plans for that evening?
Yes.
What were they?
I was getting ready to cook dinner, so he was coming back home to eat and chill with me and my daughter.
And let me ask you, at the time, were y'all two dating?
Yes.
All right. Did he stay at the house
That night?
that night?
No, he never returned.
You said you had to get your daughter maybe around 6:00 p.m. What time did he leave your house?
I'm not sure.
Was it before you left to get your daughter or after you left to get your daughter?
He left just a couple of minutes before me.
Did you know where he was going?
He told me that he was running to the city and that he was dropping Barter off and then he was coming back.
Was there anything that you saw or observed that kind of triggered him leaving?
Kind of, but not really. I mean, I guess like the boy kept like just trying to insert himself like, oh, you cooking? I'm staying too. Can I stay? And like he was, my niece was there. So he was trying to like court my niece or whatever. And so I want to say the phone rang, if I remember correctly. And that's how he just ended up go ahead and leaving.
Do you know whose phone rang? Okay. When he left, did he leave with Barter?
Yes.
Did he ever make it back home?
No.
Did you at some point learn about his death?
Yes.
All right. Permission to approach your mom?
Yeah.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 123BV. Do you recognize individual 123BV?
Yes.
How do you recognize him?
That's Shamel.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of how Shamel looked prior to his death?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to admit 123VV into evidence.
It's admitted.
Permission to publish.
You may.
And is that Mr. Drinks?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Any questions for this witness?
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. One quick
Go ahead.
question. Have you ever heard of the name Christian Johnson?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
This one is signed to loss. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Thank you for your time. You're excused. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, court can go to school.
Whomever it is.
Your Honor, the state calls Philip Norton.
Okay. Where's he going?
You raise your right hand. You swear to testify to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir.
I need you to state your first and last name, and spell your first and last name to the record.
Phil Norton, PhilNorton.
Good morning, Mr. Norton. How are you?
Good.
Good. Mr. Norton, would you tell the jury, are you a gun owner?
Yes,
How long have you owned guns, firearms?
my entire life.
What type of guns have you owned throughout your lifetime?
Couldn't tell you.
Have you ever owned a Glock 9mm weapon?
Yes,
All right. Now, when you purchase your firearms or when you obtain your firearms, where is it that you ordinarily get your firearms from?
various places. I make holsters for a living, so I come across a lot of guns.
You make what for?
Holsters for guns.
Okay. And you said, so you come across a lot of guns?
I do gun shows almost every weekend,
All right. And where do you do your gun shows?
all over the place.
During your gun shows, do you buy guns from people or do you just sell them?
Everything, it changes every day. It's almost like a pawn shop.
Okay. All right. And do you
There's a
have-
lot of trading going on, selling, buying, not necessarily just guns, everything.
Okay, including
Ammo,
your
optics, holsters, bags, everything in the industry.
Okay. Do you have to comply with any federal regulations at those gun shows?
If you buy from an FFL agent, yes. If you buy from a FFL holder, yes.
And what is an FFL holder?
Federal firearms license.
All right. Now, when you say if you buy from an FFL holder, you have to comply with federal regulations. During those
Okay.
exchanges and during those sales and transactions that take place at the gun shows that you attend, are you either buying from FFL holders or are you an FFL holder?
No.
So there's no restrictions to the way that you sell and
If
purchase
you're a
guns?
private owner or a private seller, under the Constitution, you can buy and sell guns. You don't have to have an FFL license.
Okay,
Just like if you were my neighbor and I sold you a gun.
okay.
I don't know if you know that or not.
I do not, because you just told me.
Yeah.
So when you purchase a firearm from someone, is there any kind of record or do you keep any kind of record of the types of
Not
firearms?
unless it's an FFL agent, no. Unless, if it's an so in other words, if I go to Academy Sports, there's paperwork filled out.
Okay.
If it's a private sale, no.
Now, you said you've owned guns all of your life, or at least you've
Mhm.
had
Yes, ma'am.
access to firearms. So is it safe to say that you're pretty familiar with firearms and how they work?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the types of gun that you've owned, have they all been semi-automatic? Have they sometimes been revolvers, pistols, a whole range of guns?
Yes.
Yes to which question, since I asked a
All of
compound
them.
one? Okay. Have you ever owned an automatic weapon?
No.
Have you ever handled an automatic weapon?
No.
Do you know what an automatic weapon does?
Yes.
And how do you know that?
Because this is my business.
Fair enough. And so is it safe to say you make it your business to do that type of research, or you've seen it in action?
It's 2024. If you can't see that on YouTube, it's pretty easy.
Okay,
It's very acceptable knowledge. Everybody has it.
all right. And what about the way that a gun is made or transitioned from a semi-automatic to an automatic weapon? Are you familiar with that as well?
No, not how to do it.
Not how to do it?
Mm-mm.
Are you familiar with the mechanism that causes a gun to go from semi-automatic to automatic?
Which one?
The switch.
I am familiar with it.
All right. Have you ever purchased a switch?
No. I've only seen it on TV or YouTube, I would say.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you what we have marked as states 51XX alpha. May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. May I approach you, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, are you able to recognize the firearm that is in this box?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you ever owned the firearm that is in this box?
According to why I'm here, yes.
Now, would you explain what you mean when you say according to why you're here?
I believe I purchased this off of a law enforcement agent, and then I traded it at some point.
Okay.
What I've been told, and I believe when I was talked to about it, yeah.
And does this appear to be the firearm that you purchased from that?
Not anymore, now with that switch on it.
Okay. Do you see the switch on it that you're talking about?
I do, I know what they are.
Okay.
I've never seen one. I've only seen it on YouTube.
All right. Point two,
That's it, right?
is it okay if I hold it up, Judge?
Yes,
All
it's locked, right?
Yes,
It is, Judge.
Yes.
it's right there in the back.
Okay. So this little part right here?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And so somehow that makes it so you just pull the trigger once.
Okay. And what is your understanding of when you say you pull the trigger once, somehow that
It
makes it?
just, it empties it. It just, you don't have to pull it again.
Okay. And given your experience with firearms, is there any particular reason that you've never purchased a switch or utilized?
It's a felony and illegal, be a good reason.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And the last time that you owned this weapon, it did not have that switch attachment on it.
It didn't come from the officer like that, and it didn't leave me like that.
Do you remember what you did? Did you sell it at one of your gun shows?
I really don't. I tried to recall. It was quite a while after. I don't know if I traded it or sold it, or I really don't remember.
Okay.
I probably traded it because you can usually trade in it more value.
And when you say traded it, would it have been at a gun show or at a pawn shop?
No, at a gun show.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, there's not records that are kept of who you would have traded it to.
No, ma'am.
And then once you traded it, you kept no contact with the buyer of the firearm to know what they did with it.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Just one second. Now, is it, I'm sorry, I'm gonna let him make that like it should be. Is it safe to say, or I should ask you, do you even know a person by the name of Shannon Stillwell or Shannon Jackson?
No, ma'am.
Do you even know a person by the name of Diamante Kendrick?
No, ma'am.
Do you know anyone that goes by the name SB?
No, ma'am.
Do you know anyone that goes by the name Yak Gotti?
No, ma'am.
Do you know a Jeffrey Williams?
No, ma'am.
Do you know anyone that goes by Young Thug personally?
No, ma'am.
And is it safe to say you've never had any transactions with either of those people?
Ask that again?
Have you ever had any transactions with either of those
No,
people?
ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. That's all I had.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions for this witness? Mr. Weinstein, okay.
Good morning, Mr. Norton.
Morning.
My name's Doug Weinstein. I represent Diamante Kendrick, who's sitting right over there.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions. You said that when you had this firearm, it did not have a switch on it, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't know who modified it to put that switch on there, do you?
No, sir.
You don't know if my client, Mr. Kendrick, has ever been in possession of this gun, do you?
No, sir.
Okay. You don't know if he's ever fired this gun, do you?
No, sir.
All right. No further questions. Thank you.
Redirect.
Just briefly, you were not at a person by the name of Jeffrey Williams' house on May 9th, 2022, were you?
No, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time. You may step down, call your next witness. You're excused. Thank you.
Sit call, Dr. Melissa Sims Stanley.
Raise your right hand. You swear affirm the testimony you give, the truth, the whole truth. I do. State, swear your first and last name for the court, please.
Melissa Sims Stanley, Melissa Sims Stanley.
Say good morning.
Good morning.
Could you explain to the jurors how you are currently employed?
Currently I'm retired as of July this year.
And prior to July of this year, well, congratulations, Juan. And prior to July of this year, can you tell the jurors how you were employed or where?
Yes, I was an associate medical examiner with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
And can you tell the jurors how long were you an associate medical examiner with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
I began at Fulton County as a locum tenens or contract medical examiner in March of 2020 and was hired full-time in July of 2022.
And prior to beginning your contract work in March of 2020 with Fulton County, can you tell the jurors, were you employed by other medical examiners, agencies in other counties?
Yes, I was a regional medical examiner with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation from July of 2000 to December of 2019.
Now, can you tell the jurors a little bit about your educational background and training that has allowed you to work as a medical examiner for all these years?
I obtained a Bachelor of Science degree from Emory University, a medical degree from the Medical College of Georgia. I did a one-year internship in internal medicine, also at the Medical College of Georgia. I then completed an anatomic and clinical pathology residency, followed by one-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Medical University of South Carolina.
And can you tell the jurors, in your number of years working in various medical examiners, agencies or offices, approximately how many autopsies have you performed?
Greater than 3,500.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will tender Dr. Sims Stanley as an expert in forensic pathology.
Okay.
She is so qualified and may testify as an expert in that field.
Thank you, Judge. Now, Dr. Sims Stanley, can you tell the jurors generally when you are preparing to begin an autopsy, some of the first steps that you take before actually beginning the autopsy?
Yes, every medical examiner's office has a staff of medical examiner investigators. So the coroner, if it's a certain county, or law enforcement will contact the medical examiner's investigators to discuss a death. If that death falls within the jurisdiction of a medical examiner's office, then the case is accepted into that office. Cases which fall under the Georgia Death Investigation Act to be autopsied by medical examiner's offices are unnatural or unexpected deaths, unnatural being homicide, suicide, accident. However, every medical examiner's office gets a fair number of natural deaths, drug-related deaths. It's just that they may be in the unexpected category.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors, while working at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, was it a part of the normal procedures and practices for an autopsy to be documented with photographs?
Yes.
And as you do the procedures with the external and internal portions of the autopsy, are you having someone I guess, take your notes of your findings and conclusions? Memorialize them.
I take notes during the autopsy and then dictate the autopsy afterwards to be transcribed.
Okay, and are your findings and conclusions then memorialized in a report?
Yes, they are.
And is that something you did for every autopsy that you performed while working with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, I want to direct your attention to March 17th of 2022. Did you have the occasion to perform an autopsy on a gentleman named Shamel Drinks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as it relates to the autopsy of Mr. Drinks, were the policies and procedures that you just described completed? And I mean, were photographs taken and was a report created?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to show you what's been marked as state's exhibits. Mr. Weinstein. I want to show you what's been marked as state's exhibits 126 through 161, and then state's exhibit 162, Victor Victor.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sim Stanley, in your review of state's exhibits, we'll start with 126 VV through 161 VV. Do you recognize the photographs contained in those exhibits?
I do.
And can you tell the jurors how you recognize those photographs?
They are photographs which were taken during the course of the autopsy.
Okay. And are those photographs in state's exhibits 126 VV through 161 VV? Are they fair and accurate copies of the photographs taken during the March 17, 2022 autopsy of Mr. Drinks?
Yes, sir.
And I want to move to state's exhibit 162 VV. Can you tell the jurors, do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
It is a copy of my autopsy report.
Okay. And is state's exhibit 162 VV, is it a fair and accurate copy of the autopsy report that you created for the autopsy that you did on Mr. Drinks on March 17th of 2022?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender what's been marked as state's exhibit 126 VV through 162 VV.
Through, Your Honor, for 126 to 161, no objection. 162, I don't have an objection for admitting it for the record. I guess it's a report.
Okay, well, those are all admitted. And in terms of what goes out, we'll sort that out later.
Now, Dr. Sim Stanley, can you explain to the jurors when you began the autopsy procedure on Mr. Drinks on March 17th, can you tell the jurors what you did first to kind of initiate your process as it related to the autopsy?
Yes. Before any autopsy, the investigative information, which is written up by the investigator, is reviewed. I always say an autopsy is never performed in a vacuum. You always have the investigative information first, And then a further investigative information or medical history is needed, that's requested by the medical examiner. So in this case, as there were gunshot wounds, X-rays were taken of Mr. Drinks. Before the autopsy, every medical examiner's office has the capability to perform X-rays. In this case, it's because if there are bullets in the body, the location needs to be determined and they need to be recovered at autopsy. After that, the external examination is performed, documenting everything from hair color, eye color, scars, tattoos, trauma, obviously, if trauma is present. And then the internal examination is performed.
Okay, and I want to show you, it should pop up on the screen before you, States Exhibits 127 BV and 129 BV. Now, Dr. Sim-Stanley, can you explain to the jurors, I guess, the purpose of this photograph that is taken during the autopsy procedure?
This is a facial identification photograph. You will notice in every photograph there is the unique identifying case number for this autopsy and for every piece of evidence which is associated with this autopsy.
Okay, and in States Exhibit 129, can you tell the jurors, is this the state in which Mr. Drink's body was received by the medical examiner's office?
Yes, everyone is received within a sealed and labeled body bag. Once that body bag is opened, photographs are taken along the way as an extra step of documentation. So this is a photograph of how Mr. Drinks was received. The white paper bags on the hands are placed on the hands, typically by law enforcement at the scene for preservation of possible evidence.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors, in your, I guess, when you began the external review of Mr. Drinks, can you tell the jurors, did you notice, as it relates to the injuries, anything like soot or stippling?
No. However, there was what's called pseudo stippling or false stippling associated with the entrance gunshot wound of his neck.
Okay, can you explain to the jurors what is pseudo stippling and how is that created?
Yes. Well, first, soot is the combustion of gunpowder, which is associated with contact or near contact gunshot wounds. Gunpowder stippling refers to the burning and unburned grains of gunpowder, which can impact on the skin around an entrance gunshot wound. They look like red pinpoint, very small abrasions. This is characteristic of close range or intermediate range gunshot wounds. In this case, the investigative information and the scene findings I had was that Mr. Drinks was found deceased within a vehicle, and that there were gunshot wound defects noted in the car doors, the front door, the front driver's door, the front passenger door, as well as the front passenger's windshield. So he had what's called pseudo stippling, so it's not gunpowder stippling, but there were larger irregular abrasions which were associated with the entrance gunshot wound of the neck. So what that tells you is, in conjunction with the scene findings, that when a bullet passes through an intermediary target, say the bullet passes through a wall or a window prior to striking the victim, that can fragment the bullet, and those bullet fragments can impact on the skin around the entrance wound, or it can fragment the intermediary object itself, the door, the window. So those fragments can impact. So there were those irregular fragments of either the intermediary target or the projectile around the entrance wound of the neck.
And the irregularly, can't say that word this morning, the irregular, the things that you found to be not normal, I guess. My mouth is not going to say that word today. Can you tell us, in State's Exhibit 138 BB, can you point out to the jury what you are talking about as it relates to the pseudo stippling?
Yes, it's easier to see on what's termed the clean photograph. Photographs of wounds are taken before cleaning the body and after.
Yes.
But
145 BV, if that will help assist.
Yes, if you can look at the top of the photograph, when we see the outline of his mandible or his lower jaw, I think you can appreciate there are some irregular red or dark areas that are associated around his mandible. And also around what's termed the mastoid process, this bump that you feel at the base of the skull. So those are characteristic of what's called pseudo-stippling. So they're fragments of the intermediary target.
Now, can you tell the jurors, how does that affect your ability to determine, I guess, the range of fire, or how far a barrel of a gun is from the gunshot wound that we're looking at here in State's Exhibit 145, Victor?
Well, once a projectile has passed through an intermediary target before striking the victim, the medical examiner is not able to determine that distance. Say if there is the shooter, a door, and the victim, the medical examiner is not able to determine whether the shot was fired immediately next to the door or 30 feet, 50 feet, or more away from the door. So it's termed indeterminate range. In other words, you don't know the range of fire through an intermediary target. So this was indeterminate range through an intermediary target. That's the range of fire.
So the findings that you just talked about, are they consistent with someone being shot while in a vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you talked about in State's Exhibit 145 BV that this wound on the neck was an entrance wound. Can you tell the jurors, is there an exit wound associated with this injury, this shot to the neck?
There was not. The bullet was retained within the body.
Okay, and I should have asked you this first. In the exhibit we're looking at in 145 BV, can you tell the jurors what side of Mr. Drink's body is this gunshot wound to the neck?
This is the right side of the neck.
It would be the side that's, I guess, closest to, if you're sitting in the driver's seat of a vehicle, to the passenger, I guess, compartment.
Correct, yes.
Now, can you tell the jurors, if there is no exit wound, can you explain to the jurors, were you able to determine during the external and internal portions of the autopsy that you performed, the pathway of travel of the projectile or bullet through Mr. Drink's neck and into his body?
Yes, the bullet entered the right side of the neck. It was going upward, in other words, towards the top of Mr. Drink's head and to his left. So the bullet passed through the soft tissue of the neck and impacted the base of the skull, fractured the base of the skull, and caused bleeding within the brain case, and also caused a small laceration of the base of the brain.
Now, Doctor, can you explain to the jurors when someone receives a traumatic injury like this, and you said it goes through Mr. Drink's neck, it fractures the base of his skull, and does it travel upward?
Yes, it was traveling upward.
Okay. The areas of the brain that you just described, that the pathway of travel is for the projectile, can you tell the jury what areas of the brain is affected, and what motor skills does it affect as it relates to someone who is shot in this manner?
Well, in this case, the bullet fracturing the base of the skull, this represents a massive injury to the skull and also to the brain. It caused bleeding on the surface and within the brain. And whenever there is massive trauma such as this to the brain, consciousness is lost immediately. However, I could not determine whether this shot was instantly fatal or if Mr. Drink still had some cardiac and respiratory activity for some undetermined period of time. Sometimes with these catastrophic injuries to the brain can send out a signal to the heart, which causes the heart to either stop beating immediately or to go into a lethal rhythm. So consciousness would have been lost immediately, but whether death was instantaneous or there was some cardiac activity or breathing activity for some period of time, I couldn't determine.
And can you explain to the jury, based on the circumstances you kind of just described, I know you described what the brain, the message that is sent to the heart. Can you explain to the jurors, are there other things that the body does under these circumstances? And I mean, are there any involuntary actions that the body can produce as it relates to someone who was shot in this manner?
Well, if there was still cardiac and respiratory activity, then there could have been obviously breathing. As people are dying, they can exhibit abnormal patterns of breathing. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
And I guess I'll give you an example. In an instance where someone is shot like this, and can someone's hands clench and it remain clenched because of the immediate traumatic injury that they received to their brain?
It's possible, yes.
Now, as it relates to the direction of travel, if Mr. Drink's head is tilted to the left and he's shot from the right side through the passenger door, would that be consistent with, I guess, why the projectile would travel upward?
Yes. And just a clarification, when I talk of the direction of the bullet, that means the direction of the bullet once it enters the body. I'm not able to determine direction of the position of the gun or the shooter from that.
Okay. And so if the bullet enters the right side of his neck, it travels upward. Can you explain to the jurors where the bullet ended within the head cavity of Mr. Drakes?
Yes, the bullet was recovered within the fractured base of the skull.
Okay. Can you explain to the jurors, as you continued the autopsy, were there any other injuries associated with a gunshot wound?
Yes. Mr. Drinks had a gunshot wound pathway through the upper portion of his right forearm. It entered what's referred to as the back or the dorsal aspect of the forearm. The bullet passed through the soft tissue of the forearm and then exited the ventral or inside surface of the right forearm.
And in the exhibit that we're looking at in front of you states it's 140 VV. Is that the entrance wound that you just described as it relates to the shot that he received in his forearm?
Yes, that is the entrance wound.
Now, I want to show you State's Exhibit 142 VV. I know you just described kind of the travel or the pathway of travel of the bullet. In this exhibit, 142, Victor, is this the exit wound that you just described?
Yes, it is.
Now, can you explain to the jurors how you're able to determine which is an entry wound and which is an exit wound based on your training and your number of years of experience?
In general, entrance gunshot wounds have a more round, regular appearance. Typically, entrance gunshot wounds have what's called an abrasion border. This means as the bullet pierces the skin, it abrades or scrapes off a thin border of the skin around the wound. Exit gunshot wounds typically have a more irregular appearance. They typically do not have abrasion borders, but there can be exceptions.
And in State Exhibit 141 VV, the abrasion border that you're describing, is that what's in the middle of, I guess, State Exhibit 141 VV, the darker colored area around the gunshot wound?
No, that's more of the flap of skin.
So you're the doctor, I'll let you do it.
This entrance gunshot wound was larger than normal. It was 1/2 inch. The entrance gunshot wound of the neck was about 2/10 or 3/10 of an inch. So because this entrance gunshot wound was round, it was larger and more irregular. That was also consistent with this projectile also passing through an intermediary target. The abrasion border was slightly more irregular. So here we see this is a dark abrasion. There's also a thinner rim of dark abrasion on this side of the entrance gunshot wound. This represents a laceration or tear of the skin. And then this area is just somewhat of an irregular flap of skin.
Okay, and then I'm gonna bring back up States 142 VV. Can you explain to the jurors the difference in the exit wound that we're seeing here as it relates to the entry wound, and how you are able to make your determinations?
Yes, this is an exit wound. Exit wounds can either look like multiple lacerations or tears of the skin, but one of the characteristics of exit gunshot wounds is that you can reapproximate the skin edges, and that exit gunshot wounds typically do not have an abrasion border. So there's no abrasion border associated with this wound, and it was very easy to reapproximate the skin edges.
Thank you very much. Now, as a part of the autopsy that you performed, I want to show you States Exhibit 147 VV and 148 VV. Can you explain to the jurors, I guess, the analysis that you did as it relates to the jacket that Mr. Drinks had on when he was shot?
Yes, for homicide cases, photographs of the clothing are always made, and then photographs are taken to determine if there are defects in the clothing which seem to correspond with the gunshot wounds.
And when you're examining the clothing of a victim who's been shot, do you look for soot, like you talked about earlier, to help you make a determination as it relates to range of fire?
Yes.
Okay. Now, lastly, I want to show you States Exhibit 161 VV. And you described at the beginning of your autopsy that x-rays are always taken, as well as the fact that you, during the autopsy, were able to remove a projectile from I think you said the base of the fractures of the skull of Mr. Drinks. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in States Exhibit 161 VV, is this the projectile that you removed?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And because my medical terminology is limited, can you explain to the jurors? You said you removed it from the base of the skull fractures. Where is that?
Yes, I actually removed it from the occipital skull. The occipital skull forms the lower back portion of the skull, but also the back half of the base of the skull. I wrote sphenoid skull, which is a portion of the skull which is in the central base of the skull, and that was a mistake, and I noted it in the report. It was recovered from the occipital skull, not the sphenoid skull.
And in 146 VV, can you orient the jurors? I guess, do you see, I guess, the general area where the projectile would have been removed? Is it contained in that photograph, like the base of the skull?
No, that photograph was just to document whether there were injuries behind the right ear.
So I'm gonna have you, I guess, show on me, where would the bullet have been removed as it relates to the base of Mr. Drink's skull?
The bullet would have been removed from, it's difficult to point because it would have been, if we think of the base of the skull, it would have been inside, below the skull base, somewhat on the right side.
Is it near the knot that you described earlier? On the other side?
It would have been internal to that, yes.
And can you tell the jurors, once you removed the projectile and placed it in the clear box with it being labeled, what do you do with it next?
It is then submitted as evidence to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Now, as a part of your autopsy procedures, can you tell the jurors what your determination was as it relates to the cause of death of Mr. Drinks?
Yes, I stated that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds.
And as it relates to your determination of the manner of death of Mr. Drinks, can you explain to the jurors what your determination was?
Yes, for the purposes of a medical examiner, if the actions of another individual cause or contribute to the death, then the manner is classified as a homicide.
Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
All right, other questions? Okay.
Doctor, good morning. My name is Max Shard. I represent Shannon Stillwell, okay?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Stillwell is seated right over here. So I want to ask you about this concept of stippling and pseudo-stippling first, okay? Now, you're not saying that stippling is involved in this case, you're saying pseudo-stippling.
Yes.
Which could have been caused by the projectile fragmenting and the low pieces embedding in or affecting Mr. Drinks' skin, or low pieces of the intermediate object, perhaps a window or something like that.
Or door, yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm not talking about the pseudo-stippling that you found in this case. I'm just talking in general. When we're talking about stippling, I just want to clarify something. Stippling, you're saying, is caused by burns around a gunshot wound when it's a close and range shot.
Yes. When one says stippling, it typically means gunpowder stippling, but yes, that's correct.
Okay, and you're saying gunpowder stippling, and that's just what I want to clarify. The stippling is caused by gunpowder soot that is ejected out the barrel of the gun and would affect the skin of the unfortunate decedent, correct?
Yes, gunpowder stippling represents the burning and unburned grains of gunpowder, which exit the barrel and can impact on the skin in a close-range gunshot wound.
Okay, and I know you're not an expert in gunshot residue testing or anything like that, but I just want to clarify. These are two different concepts, correct?
That's correct.
Gunpowder stippling and then gunshot residue testing, where you would test an area or a specific object for the presence of gunshot residue. Those are two separate concepts, both involving gunshot residue.
Well, the determination of gunpowder stippling at autopsy, yes, is done by the medical examiner.
Right,
Yes.
okay. Now, in this case, as I understand, there were two gunshot wounds that you observed.
Yes.
Okay. One to the arm, to the forearm, and one to the neck.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The lethal wound, the wound to the neck.
That's correct.
Okay. And as the medical examiner, you do not know what order those 2 shots occurred.
That is correct. I do not know
Okay,
the
so
order.
Mr. Drinks could have been shot in the arm first or in the neck first.
That's correct.
Okay. And I want to talk specifically about the lethal wound to the neck. Okay. You talked and used medical terms, and it sounds like there was massive injury to the base of the brain, among other things.
The skull and the brain, yes, sir.
Okay. And you testified, to my understanding, that the ability to consciously control one's body would be immediately lost.
That's correct.
Okay. Death may not be immediate, but the ability to move body parts, to open a door, to move your feet up and down, things of that nature would be immediately lost.
Yes, conscious movement would have been immediately lost. Yes.
Okay, and we're not talking about within a minute, we're talking about immediate because of the severance of the, because the base of the
Because
brain
of
was
the
severed.
massive damage to the skull and the brain, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything else? Okay, any redirect?
Very brief. Dr. Stanley, if after receiving a gunshot wound to the neck, as Mr. Drinks did, and prior to being shot, he had his foot compressed on the brake, is it possible, or is it consistent with the fact, would his foot remain on the brake? Is that possible?
After sustaining the gunshot wound to the neck?
Yes.
Yes, that's possible. Yes.
Now, you said earlier that the direction of travel was upward. Can you explain to the jury, was it upward to the left, upward to the right? Can you explain that?
Yes, again, this direction is simply from the time that the bullet enters the body. It went towards his head, which is upward, and towards his left, upward and to the left.
And I want to ask you one last question. When someone is shot, would you expect to find gunshot residue on that person?
Not necessarily.
Okay. I don't have anything further, Your Honor.
Doctor, Mr. Abadi just asked, after being shot in the neck in the way that Mr. Drinks was, unfortunately, whether it's possible that one's foot could remain on a brake if it was already there. And you said that's possible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is not possible, you would agree it's not possible after suffering that wound that someone would be actively moving their feet up and down off the brake. That would not be possible, would it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your time, and you are excused.
Yes,
How long is your next witness?
Probably about 35 minutes.
Okay, why don't we take a break, and then we'll get back with our next witness.
All right, here.
All right, 10 minutes or whenever the jury gets back.